Right. So in the previous lecture, in fact, in the previous two lectures, we developed, the understanding of structuralism or structuralist view of language, and we got to realize that the Saussure uh, theorized that language could be divided into, uh, language could be seen as an assembly of, signs, and all of those signs in fact can be further divided into a signifier and its related signified. So if we do a small activity right now, that will kind of help us a little better to understand how it really works. So if you people could use your browser right now and uh, look up the meaning of parcel, the word parcel. Look up the meaning of parcel. You can use any online dictionary and look up the meaning of parcel. So when any one of you is done, please let me know.
So done.
Look up. Okay, good. Can you read out the meanings which are given for the word parcel?
Okay. So basically, parcel is either a noun or a verb. It can be a verb. The definition that's written for noun is that it's an object or collection of objects wrapped in paper in order to be carried or sent by post, or a quantity or amount of something specially as dealt with in one commercial transaction. And the verb is like it to make something into a parcel by wrapping it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So are there any further words given for parcel?
Yes. So package,
Yeah.
packet, carton, bundle, box, mob, company, gift wrap, tie up.
Okay. So repeat these last words again. I want to count them.
Um, Mob, company,
Hmm.
tie up, gift wrap,
Four,
wrap up, carton,
five, six,
package,
seven,
case, box,
eight, nine.
box.
Okay. Nine. Right. Now, uh, take any one word from here. For example, you can take the word package. Okay. It is one of the words, right? Package is one of the words, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, look up the meaning of the word package.
An object or group of objects wrapped in paper or packed in a box.
Okay. So, are there further words given for it?
Yes. Parcel, packet, container, box, carton, collection, combination, raft.
Yeah. So, roughly 5 to 6 words for this. Okay.
J-
So, students, you from this example, you might have noticed this thing that when we look up the meaning of a word like parcel, we come up with 7 to 8 to 9 possible meanings of that word. In other words, if we treat the word parcel as a signifier, as a signifier, it is a sign, and we divide it into signifier and signified, and we say, well, the word parcel, as we pronounce it, as I am pronouncing it for you people, the word parcel should have a signified as well, right? And the dictionary is telling us there are 9 possible signifieds for just this one word parcel. All right. So, well, we want to reach at an ultimate. signified for the word parcel. What is that one absolute? What is that one absolute signified of the word parcel? So we pick up from these 9 words one word package and look up the meanings or the signifieds of the word package. Once again, we come across 6 signifieds for the word package, right? And many of those words in the list of the signifieds of package, many of them were not the signifieds of the first word, which was uh, parcel, right? For example, the word container was not there. Okay. Now, if you wish to continue with this exercise and you look up the signifieds of all 9 words, all 9 initial signifieds of parcel, you will have to look up the dictionary for 9 times, right? And every time you might come across 6 to 7 further signifieds. What are you trying to do? You are trying to fix one signified for the word parcel. Now, I'm sure you can already imagine if you keep doing it, probably you will doing it for the rest of your life. The process will never stop, right? Because for all those 6 to 7 signifieds of each signified of parcel, for all those signifieds, once again, you will have to look up the dictionary, right? And this will be an end-ending process. And this process will not lead you to an ultimate final signified. Rather, you might have noticed it already. If you keep going like that, you will be even more confused, right? So this is a kind of initial uh, characteristic of post-structuralism. We will just connect it with some theory over here. So uh, Disasio, even if his theory of all signs divided into signifier and signified, that establishes structuralism. But remember that Disasio's influence does not finish here. Rather, as we study more of him, we realize that he also gave indication of post-structuralism as well. This remark by him, highlighted over here, he concludes with his celebrated remark: in language, there are only differences without positive terms. Now, what does this remark mean? This remark means that we understand different signs in a language because of its difference from other sign, and not because of the fact that any sign is a positive term. What do we mean by a positive term? By positive term, we mean that any word having its own inherent meaning, in its own absolute meaning, right? So no word has its own absolute meaning. Rather, we understand each word in language because of its difference from the other word. And it is because of that difference that we remember those words. Let's move on to what are its consequences. The consequences of this is Post-structuralist thought, if you read this highlighted part with me, post-structuralist thought has discovered the essentially unstable nature of signification. The sign is not so much a unit with two sides as a momentary fix between two moving layers. Saussure had recognized that signifier and signified are two separate systems. But he did not see how unstable units of meaning can be when the systems come together. Having established language as a total system independent of physical reality, he tried to retain a sense of the sign's coherence, even though his splitting of the sign into two parts threatened to undo it. Post structuralists have, in various ways, prized apart the two halves of the sign, right? So, whatever we discussed previously, in that we thought that according to the Saussure, the signs, the signifiers do not have fixed objects which they signify. For example, I said that when we use the word book and I pronounce it for you and you listen to it, the description of the book for all of you, the book that all of you will imagine when you listen to this word book, the book that all of you will imagine will be a different book for everybody. That is what he had said as we discussed earlier, right? So he then came up with this theory that, well, signifiers are not connected with physical objects as such, right? However, signifiers are connected with their abstract signifiers. There are some abstract signifiers with which they are connected, but we do not have access to that, right? However, he thought that within this system of sign and signifier and signified, there is some stability, right? Now, post-structuralist further argued, kind of going beyond the Saussure, that even in at the level of imagined system of science, even at that level, there is no stability between signifiers and signifiers. In fact, signifiers are independent of even their own signifieds. We just did that experiment in the beginning of the class, right? We looked up the dictionary and realized that even within the language, forget about the physical reality, even within the language, there is no stability, there is no stable relation between signifier and a signified. Rather, all signifiers have so many signifieds, right? And those signifiers, when they turn into signifier, they have so many signifieds, and this process goes on and on. So what do post-structuralists do? They point out that the sign can be, separated into signifier and signified in such a manner that signifier and signified do not seem to have any connection with each other, no absolute connection with each other, no stable connection with each other. So surely we might ask, the unity of sign is confirmed whenever we use a dictionary to find a meaning signified of a word signifier. In fact, the dictionary confirms only the relentless deferment of meaning. Deferment means delay. Not only do we find for every signifier several signifieds, for example, the word crib signifies a manger, a child's bed, a hut, a job, a mine shift lining, a plagiarism, a literal translation, discarded car set, cribbage. But each of the signifiers becomes yet another signifier, which can be traced in the dictionary with its own array of signifiers. Bed signifies a place for sleeping, a garden plot, a layer of oysters, a channel of a river, a stratum. The process continues interminably, right, endlessly, as the signifiers lead a chameleon-like existence, changing their colors with each new context. Much of the energy of post-structuralism has gone into tracing the insistent activity of the signifier as it forms chains and cross currents of meaning with other signifiers and defies the orderly requirements of the signified. Students, any questions so far?
No, sir.
Okay, right. So post-structuralism denies any stable relationship between signifier and signified. Rather, it asserts an endless deferment of absolute signified for a signifier. As we have noted in chapter 4, structuralists attack the idea that language is an instrument of reflecting a pre-existent reality or for expressing a human intention. That is what we already discussed, right? Because because the signifiers do not have their fixed signifieds in actual life, therefore language is not a dependable instrument to reflect a pre-existing reality or to express human intention. All right, they believe that they believe that subjects are produced by linguistic structures which are always already in place. We discussed that in detail, that a writer only hashes and rehashes the pre-existing language structures. So a subject's utterances belong to the realm of parole, which is governed by Lang, the true object of structuralist analysis. This systematic view of communication excludes all subjective processes by which individuals interact with others and with society. The post-structuralist critics of structuralism introduced the concept of the speaking subject or the subject in process. Instead of viewing language as an impersonal system, they regard it as always articulated with other systems and especially with subjective processes. This conception of language in use is summed up in the term discourse, right? So here is the transition from structuralism to post-structuralism. So the structuralists, they treated language, as a kind of inert system, as a lifeless system, as a mechanical system. There are pre-existing structures and they just got mixed up and remixed up through the author, and thereby we have we have a text available to us. Now, post-structuralists attacked, this notion, and they asserted the value of a speaking subject or the subject in process. So, of course, who is the speaking subject? The speaking subject is the author. It could be just any person. It could be me speaking right now. Okay, and they argued that the subject, the speaking subject, does not operate in vacuum. Rather, the speaking subject exists in a society, and therefore the speaking subject interacts with so many other systems as well, which surround the speaking subject. Therefore, the subject is constantly in a process, it is constantly changing, right? Therefore, when a subject articulates any meaning or articulates any intention, it is not articulation just of the pre-existing structures. Rather, it is also articulation of the subject herself or himself, right? So the subject is also speaking, and what the subject is saying, the subject is saying what other systems put together ask him to say or dictate him to say, right? So the subject is, in control of not just this system of language, but other systems as well. Now, this conception is summed up by the term discourse, right? Now, the Bakhtin school were probably the first modern literary theorists to reject social notion of language. They insisted that all instances of language had to be considered in a social context, right? Every utterance is potentially the site of a struggle. Every word that is launched into social space implies a dialogue, and therefore a contested interpretation. The relation between signifiers and signifiers are always fraught with interference and conflict. Language cannot be neatly dissociated from social living. It is always contaminated, interleaved, opaquely colored by the layers of semantic deposits resulting from the endless processes of human struggle and interaction. So there are so many interferences, in the process of articulation when a subject articulates, right? And the subject exists in society, in a social space at the same time. So therefore, when language is, articulated, it is already, contaminated by other systems which surround an individual. So post-structuralist thought often takes the form of a critique of empiricism, the dominant philosophical mode in Britain, at least from the mid 17th century onwards. Now, what did empiricism say? Empiricism saw the subject as the source of all knowledge. The human mind receives impressions from without, which it sifts and organizes into a knowledge of the world, which is expressed in the apparently transparent medium of language. The subject grasps the object and puts it into words, right? So I'm sure all of you already understand how it works, right? Uh, every other day you are asked to engage in the similar kind of activity, that is, you are asked to do a lab experiment and then you are asked to describe that lab experiment in your own words, right? So this is an empirical view of language which believes that our mind is a source of knowledge and it receives impressions from outside and then it uses a transparent language to describe the experiences. This is called empiricist view of language. The post-structuralist challenged this, this approach towards language. So this model has been challenged by theory of discursive formations, which refuses to separate subject and object into separate domains. Knowledges are always formed from discourses which pre-exist the subject's experiences. Even the subject itself is not an autonomous or unified identity, but always in process. And then there is more detail over here. So what surrounds us is social system, but there is another word for social systems. That word is called, the phrase highlighted over here, discursive formations. The word discursive comes from discourse. What is a discourse? Discourse is a collective system of knowledge which already surrounds us and enables us to make meaningful statements. For example, when you conduct an experiment related to an action and reaction, you read the force of an action as equivalent to the force of a reaction. All right, you did that experiment and then you describe that, right? Your professor might be very happy with the way you describe it. You might describe it perfectly and you could tell, look how this object moved, that was an action, and this object B moved later on because of the force of object A, and therefore this was the reaction and both are equal, right? Now, your professor would be happy because your professor is an empiricist, right? But post-structuralism challenges this way of looking at the use of language to describe an experience. So a post-structuralist, if your professor is a post-structuralist, he probably or she probably won't be much happy because of the way you describe it, because that professor will say to you that you are engaged in a useless activity, a useless exercise. because a post-structuralist will say that whatever you have just described, you haven't said anything new. Rather, you just confirmed the pre-existing discourse, or you just confirmed a pre-existing discursive formation, or you just confirmed the pre-existing discursivity. Well, what is that pre-existing discursivity, or what is that pre-existing discursive formation that we just verified? Well, the pre-existing discursivity or discursive formation that you verified is this, that the physical objects move in an ideal atmosphere, right? So you assumed in the whole process of describing that experience that in the whole experiment that you observed, there was no external intervention. There was no air friction, there was no other kind of friction, there was an ideal pressure, so on and so forth. So, therefore, as a speaker, you just became an agent of pre existing discursive formation, thereby, all individuals or all subjects, so to say, we all subjects are in all of the articulations that we make, we all subjects are in fact dependent upon or agents of the pre-existing discursive formations. So we discursively, we are pre-existing subjects. Even we ourselves are part of that discursive formation. Our thinking has already been made by an existing system of knowledge, and we just keep repeating and replicating, which is already a confirmed body of knowledge, and there is nothing that new that we are producing. And this becomes really, provocative when we read, a little more about Michel Foucault, who was pioneer of this idea. Yeah, good. The work of Michel Foucault has gone much further than this in mapping the discursive formations, which often in the name of science have enabled institutions to wield power and domination by defining and excluding the mad, the sick, the criminal, the poor, and the deviant. For Foucault, discourse is always inseparable from power, because discourse is the governing and ordering medium of every institution. Discourse determines what it is possible to say, what are the criteria of truth, who is allowed to speak with authority, and where such speech can be spoken. For example, and this example is really helpful, so please read it carefully. To take a degree in English literature, we must study in or correspond with a validated institution. Only recognized teachers of the institution are allowed to determine the ways in which subjects are studied. In a given period, only certain kinds of speaking and writing are recognized as valid, right? So this discourse that we are talking about, a discursive formation which pre-exists, it is tied with power structure in the society. Okay. In fact, my favorite example is not an educational institution. My favorite example is the judiciary, right? So people who deal in judiciary, they are expert in a particular knowledge, right? And that knowledge is called law, right? So they study law and they claim that they are expert in it, they are expert in interpreting it, right? Well, expertise it in its own right, of course, we understand that. But look at the other side of this. The other side of it is that based upon that claim on expertise, those people are able to exercise an extraordinary power in the society. You know, they can declare somebody alive and they can declare somebody dead based upon the punishment that they, you know, uh, announce for that particular person, right? So this is what Foucault pointed out, that discourses in society. So there is a legal discourse, right? There is a legal discourse. So discourses, they kind of operate in society in connection with power, because these discourses operate through institutions. So the discourse of law operates through the institution of judiciary, right? And therefore is able to exercise extraordinary amount of power, right? So summing it up for today only, uh, basically post-structuralists attacked any kind of relationship between signifier and signified, and they pointed out that the relationship between them is unstable. Furthermore, they said that the subjects who speak, those subjects are not stable subjects as structuralists had believed. Structuralists had thought that subjects are neutral, and when they speak, they just mix and remix the pre existing language structures. Post structuralists, on the other hand, said, well, the subjects themselves are not stable, they are not fixed, they are not neutral, rather, they are also part of a system. And there are other systems which keep influencing them. And those systems are called discourses, or uh, uh, they are called discursivity. Okay, discourses. And therefore, those discourses shape the speaking subjects, influence them constantly, make them choose certain signifiers and certain signifieds, right? So there is a thing that we call subject formation. So even the subjects are being formed by those discourses, and the meaning that they convey, that meaning is pre-given, that is already made available to them. They are just blindly obeying the pre-existing discursive system of which they are part. All right. And Foucault pointed out, following on that post-structuralist thought, that the institutions, they kind of grab the opportunity and they connect the discourses with power, right? And that is how subjects are kind of controlled in a given society. All right. So this is all for today. You can take a minute if you have a